Hey guys, and welcome to the Buster Bunch Intro to Melee Guide. This time, we'll be covering the basics of Melee in 4 categories: gear and perks, passive boosts, permanent unlocks, and ability rotations. Starting off with the weapons, the ideal setup to use is a combination of dual wield and two-handed weapons, as they respectively hold unique abilities. That being said, if you prefer a more casual playstyle that doesn't involve switching, dual wields are the way to go, as they have much more flexibility and damage potential. Use the highest tiered weapon that you can until you get to tier 85s, where passive effects and specials play a more important role. Let's go over some weapons to cover their effects. To start off, we have the Scourge, which has a passive effect that adds a stack of abyssal parasites for each hit you do. So for every attack, the target takes bleed damage for up to 50 stacks. And once you get the parasites going, the tier 92 weapon's base damage can out DPS tier 95 flanks only after a couple of stacks. Just make sure to keep attacking your target, otherwise after 9 seconds all your stacks are gone. Next up, we have the tier 85 Dark Ice Shard and Silver. Using these allows you to both use Destroy and Hurricanes with dual wield, and they don't share a cooldown anymore. After that, we have the Masterwork Spear of Annihilation, which is a tier 92 spear that extends the duration of all bleeds applied with it by 50%. This effect's extremely powerful, which is why it's recommended to cast all bleeds with this weapon. As for the Zaros Godsword, it spec summons a black hole which increases your damage by 25% and periodically damages targets within its range. And lastly, a pretty neat weapon to use before an encounter is the Dragon Battle Axe. You can use its spec at the Adrenaline Crystal, which boosts your melee damage by 20% at the cost of a hit chance reduction of 10%. The tier 95 weapons like the Exekiel or Langswords are going to be covered in our advanced melee guide. As for armor, you can work your way up to Masterwork, which can be upgraded to custom fit trim Masterwork. This armor doesn't degrade during Slayer or in Elite Dungeons, and it does have a set effect as to where 30, 40, or 50% of the damage you take will be temporarily negated and dealt to you as a slow bleed depending on the amount of pieces that you're wearing. You could also completely skip Trim Masterwork and get a tier 95 Vestments of Havoc set, but that won't be covered in the introductory guide. For the Helm slot, the best option is the Jaws of the Abyss. It has a passive effect that generates 2% adrenaline per bleed on your target for every basic ability, which is a huge influx of adrenaline. This helmet synergizes very well with the Scourge, as you're guaranteed to always have an abyssal stack on your opponent, which counts as a bleed. For the gloves, if your target's poisonable, use Cinderbanes. If not, you can use Gloves of Passage, which will increase the damage of your bleeds for 6 seconds after using abilities like Havoc or Smash. You can also swap in between these gloves to get the best out of both effects. For boots, just use your armor's boots unless you need to use Bladed Dive with a two-handed weapon for encounters like Raksha, where laceration boots can be used. The Strength Skill Cape perk causes Dismember to hit an additional 3 times, which makes it a really good early skill cape. So once you can store it in your max cape, you can upgrade your cape slot to a Kiln Cape or an Igneous Kiln Cape, and that'll reduce the cost of Overpower and double its hits. As for the rings, try and shoot for a Champion's Ring. It massively increases the crit rate versus bleeding targets, especially with the enchantment of Heroism. If not, a Ring of Death is still pretty good. For the Amulet slot, use the best one you have, like a Brawler's Necklace or an Amia Souls, until you can get an EOF. A couple good specs to store in your EOFs are Dragon Claws, which provide an insane damage burst, or a Dragon Longsword, which is much more cost effective in terms of adrenaline, but provides very high damage. Moving on to the pocket slots, Arethod's Grimoire is the best book for melee, as it often hits the damage cap due to Berserk doubling your damage. Next, we have the Scripture of Jazz and then Full. Use the Scripture of Wind only if your DPM is below 200k, which you can easily verify by completing a challenge barrel or a gem. And last, we have a couple variations of spikes that you could equip. The standard armored spikes deal damage equal to the smithing level or double that if you're wearing a shield. A defender splits the difference and increases their damage by 50%. Alloy armor spikes do the same, but have a 10% chance to increase the spike damage by 10 times. And Abyssal Alloy armor spikes add a 25% chance to apply an Abyssal Parasite stack to the opponent on hit. On to perks. We'll separate them into 2 different categories: basic and advanced. At 99 Archaeology, the recommended relics are as follows: Fury of the Small, which grants all basic abilities plus 1% base adrenaline gain; Berserker's Fury, which provides a damage increase of up to 5.5% depending on how low your HP is; and Font of Life, which increases your health by 500. At 120 Archaeology, the recommended relics are as follows: Fury of the Small, Conservation of Energy, which refunds you 10% adrenaline after any ultimate ability; and Death Ward, which reduces damage taken by up to 10%. The best aura for melee by far is Berserker. It provides a 10% damage increase outside of Zerk, 4% during, and a 20% accuracy boost. It has by far the highest damage boost at the cost of only taking 10% more damage. Then we have the Majorat aura, which has a flat 5% damage boost. After that, we have Inspiration, which increases the base adrenaline gain from abilities by 0.5%. And lastly, there's Supreme Invigorate aura, which restores 10% adrenaline after ultimate abilities. If Berserker's on cooldown and your hit chance is below 100%, consider using Supreme Brawler to get your accuracy back up. Speaking of familiars, Rippers with Spiritual Prayer Potions are definitely the way to go. Try to avoid using Yaks unless it's absolutely necessary, like for Zuck hard mode and such. Now, let's talk about unlocking abilities. The most important ability to unlock for melee by far is Greater Barge. To activate it, you have to stay out of combat for 4.8 seconds, and once the buff icon appears on your buff bar and you barge, your next channeled ability will be dealt as damage over time instead of locking you into the channel, which enables you to move into abilities sooner. Blood Tendrils is a really powerful bleed that can be freely unlocked by completing the dig site quest. Chaos Roar doubles the damage of your next ability. It's especially good to use with bleeds like Dismember and Slaughter. Greater Flurry increases the base damage of Flurry and reduces the cooldown of Berserk for every hit. Greater Fury removes the channel from Fury and increases the crit rate by 10%. If it crits, it also guarantees that your next ability will crit as well. And last, Malevolent provides at most a 2% damage boost over Turmoil, which means it's best left as one of the last upgrades due to the high cost of Praisal Codexes. A really important unlock is the passive Vigor from the Extinction quest. It refunds 10% of ultimate and spec adrenaline costs. A good ability rotation maximizes average ability damage over time. In simpler words, it prioritizes the abilities that do the most damage, and take into consideration adrenaline use and cooldowns. The melee basic pattern revolves around using Dismember as often as you can, and then fitting one of the three 188% abilities, which are Sever, Decimate, and Cleave. You can slot in a Havoc before the Dismember if you're using Gloves of Passage too. Here are some of the melee abilities ranked by damage during and outside of Berserk. You don't need to memorize all of them, just know which ones deal more damage and which ones to avoid. Now that we have the basics down, let's talk about ultimate rotations. Melee revolves around Berserk, which boosts all ability damage except bleeds by 100%. That's a huge increase, which is why you want to activate Zerk as soon as it gets off cooldown or every 60 seconds. You can think of your overall rotation as 2 repeating sections. You do 20 seconds inside of Berserk and 40 seconds out, and then repeat. While Zerk's on cooldown, you can use a ZGS spec and strong bleeds while managing your adren so you reach 100% as soon as Zerk's ready. If you improperly time this, it'll result in a damage decrease throughout the remainder of the fight. Now, let's see what a rotation looks like in practice. If you're missing any of the switches, just ignore them for now and refer to the aforementioned scenarios. We'll start off by casting Zerk while throwing a Vom Bomb, drinking an Adren Pot, and using Greater Barge. Then, use 2 strong basics and apply Assault as a bleed. When your adrenaline permits it, cast Hurricane if you have Dark Ice or Langs, or alternatively, use Forceful Backhand with flanking if your target's facing away from you. Afterwards, use Destroy, cast Flurry, and cancel it with a basic as the Zerk timer ends. At this point, use bleeds like Dismember, Blood Tendrils, and Slaughter, which you can boost with Chaos Roar if you have it unlocked. Now you can cast a ZGS spec and dump a Dren with either Overpower or a Dragon spec from your EOF. Make sure to use Dismember as soon as possible, as you'll need to be off cooldown for your next Berserker rotation. On your second Berserk rotation, your Adren pod will be on cooldown, so we're going to use Limitless instead. When you're approaching 100% Adrenaline, walk away from the boss, use Anticipate, and Zerk while throwing a Vom Bomb. Cast Greater Barge, and use Dismember immediately afterwards. Follow that up with one basic and then use Limitless to bleed Assault. Then, use Hurricane if you have Dark Ice or Langs, or alternatively, use Forceful Backhand with Flanking if your target's facing away from you. Cast Flurry, and then cancel it with a basic, then finish up the rotation with Destroy. That's all for the Buster Bunch Intro to Melee guide, everyone. We hope you all enjoy the content and find it helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, or just generally enjoy our videos, be sure to leave a comment so we can get back to you. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you in the next!